November 2017 remains a watershed moment in Zimbabwean history. For 1 week, the world watched as the nation transitioned from the era of Robert Gabriel Mugabe to the new dispensation, often described as the military-assisted transition. The operation, codified by the ZDF as Operation Restore Legacy, stands as a masterclass in controlled political maneuvering. Today, we strip away the rhetoric and the sensational headlines to provide a neutral analytical examination of the tactical and strategic movements that reshaped a nation. The catalyst, the impasse. To understand the militarist movement on November 14th, we must look at the preceding weeks. The internal fissures within ZANU-PF had widened into chasm. The rivalry between the G40 faction and the Lacoste group, centered around former Vice President Emmerson Mnangagwa, had reached a fever pitch. From a strategic perspective, the militarist concern was a perceived erosion of liberation-era values and the systematic purging of veterans from party structures. The definitive catalyst, according to analysts, was the breakdown in communication when President Mugabe refused to engage in dialogue with his senior generals on November 13, 2017. The military perceived a critical threat to the state's stability. The decision to act was not merely political, it was, in the military's view, a defensive operation to protect the state from criminal elements encircling the presidency. Phase 1. The deployment. November 14. On the evening of November 14, 2017, the ZDF executed a series of synchronized movements that demonstrated a high level of operational discipline. Armored personnel carriers, APCs, were observed entering Harare, not with the chaotic fervor of insurrection, but with a deliberate surgical pace. The objective was not seizure of the state itself, but the neutralization of specific control points. The Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation, ZBC, was secured shortly after 10 p.m. This was a critical strategic move. By controlling the state broadcaster, the ZDF could dictate the narrative, ensuring that the public received their official message. That this was not a coup, but a focused effort to remove corrupt advisors, thereby preventing panic and mass unrest. Phase 2. Containment and negotiation. Following the deployment, the military focused on containment. High-profile figures aligned with the G40 factions were placed under military custody or house arrest. Concurrently, President Mugabe himself was confined to his residence. What followed was a period of high-stakes mediation. The military leadership, led by General Constantino Chiwenga, intentionally maintained the facade of constitutional continuity by refusing to formally depose the president. In the immediate aftermath, the ZDF avoided the coup label that would have triggered regional sanctions from Southern African Development Committee, SADC, and the international condemnation. They instead opted for the slow burn pressure tactic, a combination of military presence on the streets, mass demonstrations, and the commencement of impeachment proceedings in parliament. Phase 3. The diplomatic chase. The strategy relied heavily on the support of the public and the ruling party's own internal mechanisms. By facilitating or at least permitting mass protest, the military effectively outsourced the pressure on Mugabe to the citizenry. This was a stroke of genius. The optics of the people's will masked the reality of military force. When the ZANU-PF Central Committee stripped Mugabe of his party presidency, the endgame was set. The impeachment process in parliament was the final procedural hurdle. The military allowed civilian government to perform these constitutional duties, reinforcing the narrative that this was internal party correction rather than external military takeover. Was Operation Restore Legacy a coup? From a purely structural perspective, yes, it was a military intervention that forced a change in the executive branch. However, from a tactical perspective, it was a soft coup characterized by total absence of large-scale violence and a strict adherence to constitutional theater. The Zimbabwe Defense Forces proved that in the modern African context, the strength of a military operation lies not on its brutality, but on its ability to navigate the gray areas between force and legitimacy. They didn't just move tanks, they moved the political center of gravity, leveraging historical weight of liberation struggle to justify their actions.